As a young academic working in sustainability, I've been looking forward to this idea of going to these international conferences, traveling, connecting with other people working in sustainability, this cross-collaboration of different ideas. But I've always been a little bit suspicious of them. See, they're all about bringing in specialized academics from around the world to go stand up at the podium, create all of these really cool facilitations and workshops, and woohoo, let's go solve climate change and our climate crisis by flying around the world and emitting all of these greenhouse gases.
One of the big conversations that we've been having, especially in the climate change community over the last few years, is about whether or not this sort of international conference model needs some rethinking in light of the climate crisis. So the sort of traditional model is folks fly in for a big conference from all over the world. Maybe they have a 15-minute presentation slot, they give their talk, they chat with other folks, and then they go home. That experience can be really effective for networking within your community, but what's missed is the opportunity to sort of connect with the place and the local context that the conference is being held.
I've attended a lot of conferences as grad students, and it's always kind of a very weird vibe that you're just going from the airport, directly taking taxi or the bus to the hotel, and then to the convention center, and then on the way back, similar kind of route. And you never really get to kind of know what is it feel like to be in that location, right?
Conferences often end up happening in really generic, nondescript places that feel an awful lot like, the lobby of an airport. You don't really get a sense of the place when you're in a large international conference center or in a chain hotel. And often the schedules are so full that people don't really get the chance to kind of see much more than perhaps doing a little bit of sightseeing or buying some souvenirs.
And this kind of feeling was especially obvious when I was attending COP last year. The location of COP27 was a very, it's kind of a controversial place. It's in Egypt, it's in Sharm el-Sheikh, and there's a lot of discussion already built up for that. And then when we're there, it's really weird because it's a resort area. So, and the convention center is in the middle of the desert. The only conversation I had with the local person is probably the taxi driver, for example. And it kind of feels a bit weird, going somewhere but you actually know nothing about that place.
So trying to be a little bit more deliberate and thoughtful about, what's going on locally is important. To go to see what people are doing on these issues, to see where they can engage in conversations with people who are active on these issues, and that feels like a real missed opportunity.
Given all the conversations we've been having about sort of travel and connection in the last few years and what we can do as a research community to reduce the environmental impacts of the work that we do, I think one of the things that we've become very aware of is, not only the environmental cost of flying and traveling in the context of work and these conferences, but also the sort of time costs that it entails. So if you're making the commitment for, let's say, up to a week to go to an event, you really want to maximize that time. You want to get the most out of it that you can, both in terms of meeting and connecting with researchers in your community, but also, connecting with and enjoying the place that you're visiting as well.
How do we make that worthwhile? How do we make sure that the emissions and the cost of that bring benefit not only to the individual researcher but to the communities that are working on these issues kind of locally?
Okay, so this October I'm going to be attending my first climate conference, Adaptation Futures 2023, and it'll be hosted right here in Montreal. And I'm going to be wondering, how can we transform climate conferences into a learning space that fosters local and global dialogues on climate action?
My name is Blaine Harvey. I'm an associate professor at McGill University, and I lead the Leadership and Learning for Sustainability Lab there. For the Adaptation Futures Conference, I'm a member of the Science Committee, but I also am collaborating with a team here at McGill around designing learning journeys that are supposed to help bring conference participants in closer dialogue with climate-related issues happening here in the Montreal area.
My name is Yingxuan Huang. Call me Elaine. I'm a postdoctoral researcher under the supervision of Dr. Glenn Harvey. I'm kind of the postdoc of the collaboration between McGill and Ouranos to really rethink how academic conferencing or like this kind of knowledge exchange, international knowledge exchange can be done in a low carbon and like impactful and equitable way.
My name is Alexandra Leshenkovsky, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment at Concordia University. And on this project, I'm a co-investigator, and I've been collaborating with Lane to develop the learning journeys for this project and get everything organized for the conference.
So the project itself is more experimental. It's really just to take the opportunity of an international conference on the subject of climate change adaptation to really see if we can rethinking this kind of very tourist way of doing conferencing.
So especially if you're traveling, to a totally new city, perhaps a totally new country, having a program that really kind of facilitates connections and an understanding to the urban context that the conference is being held in can, help us make those connections.
Trying to create a little bit more of, if you will, like a kind of a space for connection is an important aspect of what we think should be the future of climate and sustainability conferencing.
So learning journey is a very kind of widely used method in education, really kind of trying to use experiential learning as a way for reflection and dialogue and thinking, and then sort of thinking about how can we actually use this method to stimulate more dialogue. How do we actually reimagine those spaces so that these kind of dialogue and thinking can be brought into this international conference and enrich people's conversation.
That makes sense. So it's like you're trying to facilitate a place for both international people coming in for the conference and local people to kind of facilitate just discussion surrounding sustainability and climate and things like that to really just connect these two groups of people that, with the nature of conferences might not have the opportunity. So why do you think then as well is it so important that, when you're flying there, you really have to have this two-way knowledge exchange between the local and the global community together?
So what we know about climate change is obviously that it's a global phenomenon, but that its effects are particularly experienced locally, and that those effects and those impacts are really context specific. So it depends not only on the local environment, but the local sort of society, who's vulnerable within these contexts, what kinds of infrastructure and kind of environment exists in the spaces where we're meeting or gathering.
So you're feeling that as well, that one of the reasons of facilitating these places for conversation is just this like two-way knowledge exchange.
Exactly, yeah. So it's to help kind of connect conference attendees with organizations and projects happening in the city that's hosting the conference. But it's also an opportunity for community leaders to kind of connect with the international community that's working on adaptation issues.
So how do you feel that the Glocal Learning Journeys then is going to not necessarily like fix the problem, but kind of change the way that, people connect with like the local community? Do you think it is going to even, or what are you trying to do with it?
I'm not so certain yet, but there's definitely like a lot of people are very enthusiastic about this idea, or got very interested, or like feeling like, oh yeah, like why not? Let's try it out. And I think there is hope in that sense. There is this question about a learning journey, who is learning? And so the intention for this project is really to think about everyone's learner under climate crisis. So it's not only about international conference attendees and delegates coming in to learn about this academic knowledge within the meeting rooms, but also really learn from what's happening outside of the convention center.
Yeah.
Vice versa, I'm kind of the postdoc of the collaboration between McGill and Ouranos to really rethink how academic conferencing or like this kind of knowledge exchange, international knowledge exchange can be done in a low carbon and like impactful and ethical way.
These learning journeys are going to be a really interesting way to change how we do field trips. They will help facilitate learning from each other. It'll get people outside of the conference room and to learn all about the amazing way that our local Montreal community is learning how to adapt. So now, let's see how it actually goes at the conference. Join me as I attend Adaptation Futures, as well as one of these various learning journeys to learn more about this new way of facilitating local and global dialogues on climate action. So there is a total of 7 different learning journeys that the participants at Adaptation Futures 2023 could choose from. Let's hear from the participants how those field trips went.
My name is Dominic Smith. I'm the event coordinator for the Concordia greenhouse. Without it, in Montreal, I think it's really hard to bring educational things with the plants to the people, whether it's food, whether it's house plants. I think it's very important, and things like this can help us grow it to the future.
My name is Eric Chevrier from Cult of Action. We had a tour of the urban farms here at Loyola campus and met some really wonderful people from across the world and had some really interesting exchanges about urban agriculture, about food systems, about the different plants that we're growing.
For me, as a resident of Montreal, it gave me a much deeper understanding as to the kind of industrial history and urban history of Montreal and the kind of formation of the city. And I imagine to participants who aren't from here, this would have been even stronger because it would have really brought some of these themes of adaptation futures to life in the context of a really concrete project.
It was quite interesting to see the QR codes attached to the trees, using tree mapping as a way to teach and to tell stories. I think that's been one of the biggest learning of today. Trees are great storytellers.
We hope participants will share their knowledge as youth and non-youth so we can do an intergenerational exchange on how to forward the climate movement.
Some really good conversations about the changes that we all hope to see, often that are common between different generations and countries and places, kind of the things that we all wish for, and then talking about how different groups can support each other, make those changes come to fruition.
I have been working on the fund for a number of years now, but I'm really interested to hear other people's insights, especially those who might be working as funders or as sustainability practitioners, making projects happen on the ground.
I'm excited with this tour, especially on the green urban greenhouse. We have a lot of greenhouses that are actually situated on the land, more in the rural areas. So looking at the climate science, the services, and also changing mindsets and having more urban greenhouses in the Pacific in terms of adapting to climate change.
When you have an idea, the main impediment is how do you fund it? Maybe it's not what we think about first, but it ends up being the main thing that impedes us from acting. So having this fund on campus allows us to kind of be creative and make something happen. And then the burden is on us to do something with it afterwards, because this is only seed funding. But having that to kickstart us, I think is really key and special about this.
I wasn't expecting to get that kind of contact with nature. I think when you go to a conference, you expect it to be more about the discourse of it and learning, but in this more aseptic environment, and then like being able to touch things and eat things and learn like from the land, and being more in contact with the space where you are actually coming to learn and to exchange knowledge. I think it's very interesting.
So here, this is an eighth.
It seemed like this is really where I saw the two-way learning exchange come to life, because I felt that the Lachine Est facilitators had their tour and the presentation, but really when we got to these more critical points, that's really when the discussion came to life, and when they were really inspired and also challenged to really talk about how they're planning to do this and mitigate for these potential adverse consequences in the future.
For me, it was a nice kind of like follow up from the rest of the conference. We talked a lot about storytelling and like connecting with our ecosystems, and this was I think this was a nice way to close this up. Like, I don't know, main message is sort of like know your trees. There's incredible wisdom in the trees around us. Yeah.
And we had some super interesting conversations with really enthusiastic and passionate youth leaders in the community, and it really opened my eyes to some of the struggles and challenges and barriers, and I think it made me think that there are ways that we can try and help open some of the doors to these conversations.
Like, I think even as a young person, I was like, am I youth? Can I be youth if I'm not in a youth organisation? Can I say my opinion in this space? Or does it have to be the person that has come from youth? And I think that the spaces, even where it's not like, this is youth, how can you, in organisations, just create structures where left, right, up, down, there's spaces for like feeding in of all the different kinds of perspectives.
I find a lot of youth feel, and this is myself as well too, like you get that imposter syndrome that just because I don't have a piece of paper on my wall or whatever it may be, they'll have these great teachings from their elders, they'll have these great teachings from living the life on the land and things like that, but they feel they have nothing to give because it wasn't formalized into saying, yes, you have the ability to speak on this. So that was kind of one of the things. It's like giving voice to those that feel that they don't have a voice, or feel that their voice isn't important in the space.
Traditionally, these conference field trips can feel a bit sort of helicopter parachutey, that a bunch of international delegates or conference participants that can be quite an elite group of people sort of look at a local project as if they were kind of in the zoo and then go away. So I think the challenge is, how do we facilitate these conference field trips and local experiences in a way that's a bit more profound and more two-way. And certainly I think it's super important for conferences to not just be these kind of isolated silos where international practitioners and academics talk to each other, but that they somehow move towards being more porous to local communities, since climate change and environmental issues have such a huge local element to them. And I think this was better than I'd ever experienced it before, in that the mixture between actually showing the project and then also being able to have a discussion about how things can contribute, how both sides can sort of contribute to each other. So I think it was a great start and better than I'd ever experienced it before. I would certainly encourage any conference, especially climate and environmentally related ones, to think critically and constructively about how to facilitate these exchanges and continue to do that better.
I was only able to attend one of the Glocal Learning Journeys. This one was an intergenerational climate exchange, which was hosted by Sustainable Youth Canada and took us through La Falaise in Montreal. This really created a beautiful environment for youth and non-youth to have a place to really talk to each other. These reflections of our experiences working in sustainability at various points of life was really enlightening and made me feel more connected to, it's not just us, but it's everyone who's working on it and has been working on it for so long. And it also pointed out how important it is that the burden not be put on just one generation, but that it's intergenerational, and that we do have to collaborate with each other and have such conversations and mentorships. It's very important for us to all create these spaces so that we can have these conversations, since without this purposeful design, we may not get these spaces to have these knowledge exchanges. So in conclusion, as a first-time conference attendee, this experience was really amazing, and in all honesty was one of the highlights of the entire Adaptation Futures Conference. It really moved me to be able to move beyond the conference room and to go out in the real world. And because of how connected those learning journeys were to the various conference themes, it really felt like we were directly putting in action the stuff that we were saying in the conference room into the real world, where that conference was actually taking place. These facilitated actions of the various adaptation and climate projects that are happening around the city really created opportunities to connect with people around the world, build connections, and individually expand our own understanding of what climate action and adaptation can really be. So I really hope that in the future, these types of experiences where we go out into the real world, outside of the conference room, right into the city where the conference is being hosted, I hope that this continues and that these field trips can really be taken as a learning opportunity between our local communities and the international communities. So I personally would definitely want to see something like this again.